more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Hello everyone on this fine day, talking stouts with Julia and Jeremy, Sense of Beer Style. Oh my gosh, I love doing this show. And today it is Foreign Extra Stout. I'd love to set the stage with kind of what the Style Guidelines Beer Judge Certification Program 2021 Style Guidelines document is. If you're talking about this style, right, Foreign Extra Stout, it's a mashup of foreign stout. You might hear it called export stout. You might hear it called foreign export stout. And the guidelines call it Foreign Extra Stout. So it's all these variants of names in a pretty easy to understand spectrum of examples within this style. Basically, pre-World War I examples had higher original gravities. And now we've got the essence of it can be drier. There could be an essence of Brettanomyces in more original versions, but you don't really come across those as much nowadays. And so it's basically a stout, right, which is a darker style beer that has rich notes of darker roasted malts, molasses and chocolate and all that we'll get into, moderately strong, fairly dry, and you do get those roast flavors. And that's the gist of Foreign Extra Stout. What, Jeremy, are ingredients that kind of help ground us in the study of this style?
Yeah, if we think about this, this foreign extra stout, export stout, is really to the regular stout is what the IPA was to the pale ale. Basically, we're going to ship it a long ways, so we need to add more hops and we need to add more alcohol to preserve it. So that's what we get. So to that end, they're still brewing with the pale and dark roasted malts and grains. Sometimes they'll use brown, maybe amber malts to get more of that caramel flavor out of it. And they're typically, not always, but typically going to use English hops, but more for the bitterness and less for the flavor, because this is just pure logistics. We need to keep this beer fresh. But they can use some certain adjuncts or particularly sugar because we want to get the gravity up a little bit higher, again, as a preservative. And so it was just the pure logistics of shipping. How can we keep this beer fresh? That basically begat this style, which is really, really fun. But that's the gist on ingredients. Let's go over to appearance.
Appearance first, because we're going to pour it into the glass. Jeremy has an example. I will long for it from afar. And what you're going to see in examples of this is really deep brown, if not to black in color. That's just where most stouts obviously are going anyway. Clear, right? Not hazy or cloudy, but because they're so dark in color, you're going to get them towards the black end, but not fully opaque where you can't see through it. You might see some red hues if you hold it up to the light and whatnot. That means it's not totally opaque. And then a large tan or brown collar of foam with good head retention. That often indicates when you see a color in that collar of foam that's tan more than ivory or white, that you use roasted unmalted barley. So that's often snuck in there for sure. And so that's an easy, I think, example of it. And you're going to get a sense of what you want to do, which is smell it because it looks so inviting. Right? So what does it smell like?
Oh, then this is a fun beer to smell because, and I'm not going to lie, I've mentioned this before. Generally speaking, a stout is not the first beer I'm going to pull off a shelf, but this one is just really interesting. So typically you're going to have this medium to high roasted grain, but that just translates into this dark roasted espresso or cappuccino without too much cream. You get this wonderful dark semi-sweet chocolate coming out of this. A little bit of burnt, or the fancy word we use is acrid flavor is totally okay. But remember, no beer should be harsh. It should just be a flavor of, like having a little bit of like burnt bubbles on your pizza crust, or just like burnt ends on your brisket. Just having a little bit of that flavor is kind of nice. With this, though, you can have a little bit of a low to medium fruitiness, some of the esters that come through, but these are manifesting in molasses, and I get just a touch of molasses. Licorice, I'm getting some really good licorice here, but it's not like licorice root or anise. This is more like the black licorice candy. I'm smelling that black licorice candy in this. You can get some dried fruit flavors of like figs, raisins, dates, even, and that's totally normal. In this kind of vinousness, it's almost like a not quite like a green leaf, but almost like a twig, like a sweet twig, like you get from like Italian grappa. You can get some of those flavors that come through, and it's just really interesting, and it's real subtle. You can get a little bit of alcohol in this. These are going to be slightly elevated alcohol. So if you smell a little bit of alcohol, kind of peppermint pop out of it, that's totally okay. Um, but you can expect, if we're using English hops, which is typical, then you're going to get this earthy, floral, soil type of aroma out of the hops. And even a touch of diacetyl is totally okay. But that's the aroma. How does it manifest in the flavor?
Literally everything Jeremy just described in the aroma will carry over to the flavor in these examples of being Foreign Extra Stout. That moderate to high roast, the coffee, dark chocolate, but not acrid, right? Lightly burnt is okay. And then, you're going to get, because this is fermented with ale yeast, a low to medium essence of esters. That's that fruitiness that Jeremy discussed in the aroma. And then what's not in the aroma, but worth noting in the flavor, because it certainly balances out the residual sugar, is medium to high bitterness, right? Medium to high bitterness from those hops that are used, and is a trick in brewers world, where the earlier you add the hops, the more essence you get from the hop bitterness, as opposed to the aroma and the flavor. So a big emphasis on hop bitterness for sure. And then you will get a little bit maybe of earthy, herbal, or floral aroma, as Jeremy indicated, from those English hops most of the time, but it's optional. It's not a big essence on the flavor of Foreign Extra Stout. And then also medium-low diacetyl is optional, but could appear and showcase from this English ale yeast often used. And the last piece is this is the style, one of the stouts that's talked more about for being more moderately dry in the finish, right? Even though it's got a higher final gravity, there's an essence of dryness that will come from the astringency, that will come from the carbonation, that will kind of come from the culmination of all things going in that beer. And it's one of the things that sets this beer apart, is not just that more aggressive bitterness, as Jeremy talked about, because of exporting the beer, but it's also not supposed to be really cloyingly sweet. You want it to finish a little bit dry. And the mouthfeel will certainly play a part in that. So Jeremy, take us through mouthfeel.
Yeah, absolutely. And the balance in this beer really comes through balancing the hops and the dark grains with the malt flavor of it too. Julia, you are so good and courageous about being bold enough to disagree with the BJCP when you see fit. So I'm going to take a page out of your book this time around. So I'm going to go ahead and disagree politely with the BJCP in this. So the BJCP calls this a medium full to full bodied with a smooth and even a creamy texture. When I think about a full body, I'm thinking Eisbach. This is not Eisbach. An Eisbach can finish at like 1030 something gravity, and this is not that full of a bodied beer. So I'm gonna respectfully call this a medium to maybe a medium full body, but I'm not comfortable going to full bodied. And smooth and creamy, I need some residual sugar. I need some lactose. I need some to really provide that texture. I need a decoction mash beer to really provide that texture. So this is smooth, but it's almost like a nylon smooth. It's almost like there's a grippiness to this particular sample, which is one of the classics. It's not as smooth as could be, but it's not rough around the edges either. However, the alcohol warming is there. There's just a little touch of that, and I really like that. And it's got this medium to medium high carbonation. There's a little bit more carbonation there than I would expect to see in like other samples. But so that's my take on the mouthfeel. Take it with a grain of salt, but that's what I've experienced with these type of beers.
I
But
like it.
yeah, with that, let's talk about. I think next on our list is the style comparison.
Yes, and there's two main styles to go for, but there's a strata of others to consider when
Yeah,
tasting and doing your studies. Irish Extra Stout. Don't know what it is? Go and listen to one of our shows on it, our
yeah,
Stylecast. But similar in balance to an Irish Extra Stout, although with more alcohol. So that's to be kept in mind. That's what you're looking for to help differentiate this. So you know you're drinking a Foreign Extra Stout. We've also got for style comparison, very similar in gravity to, I would say, its brother or sister beer, the Tropical Stout, but a drier finish. We did talk about that drier finish and that higher bitterness that is in the mix because it's an export. And then on top of that, you've got a imperial stout, but it's definitely not as big or rich or
mm,
intense. And then you have American stout. I think that's going to be the easiest one if you did a blind tasting
yeah.
to
It's probably close.
differentiate. You've got American stout. It's going to be the easiest one to differentiate for sure. And it's not going to have a lot of the flavor hops or the aroma hops of that American stout. And it will have different style of hops. So keep that in mind. And it's not as bitter, believe it or not. So American stout could be exported everywhere because it's even more bitter than the export for an extra stout. Go figure, right?
Yeah. I think my tip on that from my experience in studying for advanced Cicerone is the difference between this and an American stout, and you pulled it out perfectly. Those are going to be tough to distinguish. To me, it's almost like the intensity of the hops and more of the flavor of the hops. I mean, I can taste more of like a British earthy hop out of this as opposed to like an aggressive pine or woodsy or sulfuric kind of garlic, green onion, or even a grapefruit, that I would expect from an American hop. So just discern those subtle little details, but most importantly, put these side by side, and that should really help.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
take us through commercial examples.
Yeah, the obvious commercial examples of this are going to be Guinness. I mean, Guinness Foreign Extra Stout. But just to give a little love to other great breweries of this style, I chose the Cooper's Extra Stout, or Best Extra Stout. We've got the Colonel Export Stout, La Cumbre Malpayas Stout, the Pelican Tsunami Export Stout from Oregon. That's another good one, and Ridgeway Foreign Export Stout. Uh, Basically, there are going to be a lot of craft brewers that will have something like this on occasion. Look for the term extra stout, export stout, anything like that, and you're probably right in there. But I would encourage you, because people will slap a name on it, doesn't mean it's a true to style. So pull out these style guidelines, listen to this podcast as you're tasting it, and see if it's spot on or not. That being said, let's talk about some numbers.
Yep. And in your beer studies, it is very helpful to ground in the vital statistics, especially if you're going to sit and test for, say, Beer Judge Certification Program to be a judge or Cicerone Certification Program. Original gravity, think the fives, right? 1056 to 1075. Not so aggressive, but getting up there, right? 1056 to 1075 with potential extract to ferment. And final gravity, 1010 to 1018. So kind of easy to remember that it's above 1010 on the final gravity. So that is going to mean it's got some residual sweetness, even though it can finish dry in the taste. So our alcohol level is on average 6.3 to 8%, right? 6.3 to 8% alcohol by volume. And then international bitterness units, 50 to 70. That is definitely more aggressive, not as aggressive as American stout, but way getting up there. Anything above 50 international bitterness units, especially if it has a lower residual sugar, is going to be really bitter. But the more the residual sugar is, it's going to balance that aggressive bitterness. So 10 IBU uses 50 to 70. And then the standard reference method, or SRM, the color of the beer, 30 to 40, right? And you're topping it out. 40 is black in
Mhm.
SRM methods. And then, Jeremy, you can always help me out. Anything for our European friends on the conversions, please go for it.
Yes, I have those all written down, but of course, the European Brewery Convention, or EBC, is really easy. It's always pretty much double what the SRM is. So in this case, we can easily just call it 60 to 80, and that's brown to black.
Well done. Thank you, sir. And then ideal glassware and serving temperature.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't add. For those of you who speak Plato or degrees Plato, I want to make sure we put a little something out there for you as well. If we're talking Plato for the original Plato, we're looking at 14 to high 18, 18.8, which, it's got some heft to it. And it should finish out again with you mentioned the final gravity 1010 and 1018. That puts it in 2.5 to 4.5 degrees Plato. And as far as the alcohol strength, we're looking at 11.5 to about 14.5 degrees Plato for those of you who are working with that. But glassware and temp. This is one of those beers where it's a little bit strong. I'm not going to fault anyone for putting it into a snifter or a smaller glass, because if you get a stronger version to 8%, well, maybe we don't need 2, 3, 4, 5 of these. But typically, beers of this nature are going to end up in a, like I mentioned, could be a snifter, could be an English tulip, could be a Nonic pint like I'm drinking out of, which is just an ordinary shaker pint with a little bulge toward the top of the rim. And even a pub mug is just an absolute joy to drink out of. Temperature-wise, if we're looking at a refrigerator temp of 38 degrees or 4 degrees Celsius, I really want this a little bit warmer. It's going to open up. My rule of thumb is the darker, stronger it is, the warmer I want it to be. And so if we get closer to the 50 degrees or 10 degrees Celsius, that's kind of where I want this beer. But let's talk about pairings with that warmer beer.
Sure, Foreign Extra Stout, right? On the mind and
Yeah.
hopefully in the tummy. You wanna have it with food or on its own. You could go two places, obviously, and when we play this game, you can go to the sweet or savory, dessert or dinner, we shall say. Hell, even have it for breakfast. Who cares? You're gonna love it. But
Yeah.
if you're gonna pair it, I want it with something that's got some umami. And speaking of breakfast, I even see a sense of like a mushroom omelet, right? With some umami from the
Ooh,
mushrooms
yeah.
and the eggs, and get a little butter in there. That's a total contrast approach pairing. But you're going to have some synergies maybe with the stout and taking it over to those mushrooms. I would love to try that. That's just my quick hit. What came to mind, Jeremy, for you?
For me, I'm so glad you mentioned breakfast, because I'm thinking like Belgian waffles or sweet pastries. I mean, you've got that coffee, you've got that chocolate flavor, and a little bit of that like burnt and hop bitterness. It could really take on something sweet. But for dinner, this is just perfect with oysters, maybe a clam chowder. Just have all that creamy, savory kind of. Briny flavor to balance this would just be absolutely beautiful.
I love it, and you got me thinking dinner now, and I would take your, Italian spaghetti and meatballs and lose the sauce. Just go for those meatballs and, drizzle those meatballs with a little bit of olive oil and maybe some Worcestershire sauce, and then try that with
Yeah,
those with this.
you are the pro. Uh, but thank you for joining us for this foreign extra stout beer style. It's one of those that has just such an incredible story. This is a very well traveled beer, and it leads to other beers that we've talked about, like Baltic porters and tropical stouts. And none of those would exist if it weren't for this one. So listen to those other style casts and just see the evolution of your beer in a glass. But until next time, we'll see you next time, hopefully. But thank you for listening to this one.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
And me, Jeremy.
tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.